from your studies to your career choices at the beginning. How did you actually end up in this position?
It is an interesting story because it wasn't deliberate. It was an accidental discovery of something that I've ended up absolutely just loving. And I don't know if I've said it to you before, but I do love what I do. I actually grew up in property. My mum had her own real estate agency, so I went through high school sitting show days, and then it was quite natural for me to branch into sort of being a sales and rental agent. I then ended up in Jeffreys Bay for a year and a half, didn't have to work, so I decided to study, did something completely off the charts. I'm a qualified beauty therapist. And I probably should have started with, my degree, which was a BCom management. Obviously, I liked marketing. It was a subject I did, but never at any point in time did I think that would be where I would want to go. And coming back from Jeffreys Bay, I thought, well, can't make much money being a beauty therapist unless you own your own salon at the time, which I wasn't going to be doing. So let me fall back into property. And I actually got a job with one of the bigger, I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the corporate property agents. And the job at the time was sort of inner city Joburg, and it would have been collecting rents. And I just remember the gentleman who had the job open said to me, look, you are qualified, I'm offering you the job, but please go and have a chat to your parents, because if you were my daughter, I wouldn't want you to take it. So of course I went home, had a chat to them. My mum phoned up her friends in an absolute panic. We have to save Claire from the slums. Very dramatic. And one of her friends that she phoned up happened to be in the industry, in one of the cinema businesses, popcorn cinema advertising / Cinovation. And it then became, let's get Claire in for an interview before she makes the biggest mistake of her life. Went for an interview, got the job, and I started in cinema as an events coordinator, and that was over 15 years ago. And I've gone from everything that I could possibly do in cinema, short of sitting downstairs and actually sending the adverts to the cinemas, to digital media owner, into agency, and to where I am today as managing director of iProspect in Vizeum. And it wasn't deliberate, but I'm delighted that it rolled out this way.
What would you say during that journey is the biggest mistake that led to the biggest lesson?
So there are possibly two. And they're two that, when I do speak to people and I do give advice and share stories, they're probably the two that come up the most. And the first one was in my first venture, in Cinovation, and I recall learning the rule of three quite quickly. And it wasn't just the rule of three, it was also around making the tough call. And something first of all, I had gone with one supplier and I hadn't found competing quotes. So not only did the job end up being incredibly expensive, but something went wrong. It was just wrong. And I had to phone up a supplier and have the hard conversation that, because we had made a mistake together, and it was obviously a very expensive mistake, the client wouldn't be paying us. And I must admit that I possibly sat and debated that phone call for a good 2 hours before being able to pick it up. And I have a lot of conversations around being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And for me, that was the biggest hurdle. And having gotten over that, today, I'm the first person to offer to have the hard conversation. And it's really stood me well in many situations. So that's the first one. And the second one would be finding my voice. When I started in Dentsu, and that was just over 3.5 years ago, within the first 12 months of me being there, I resigned. Not everybody knows that, but I'm sure, if this finds its way to anybody who didn't know that, they do now. But I resigned at the time because I felt unheard and I didn't feel valued. I wasn't happy in the particular role. I wanted more challenge. And when I resigned and sent my resignation letter, obviously everybody got one hell of a fright because they didn't see this coming. And I had never used my voice. I had never expressed what I felt or what I wanted. But in my mind, this had been going on and nobody had seen it. But how could anybody have seen it if I hadn't explained how I was feeling? And that's something that I speak about quite often, is that you have a voice and you need to use it. And people will never know if you don't speak up.
In the past 5 years, what have you seen change? And then what's your prediction for the next 5 to 10? Maybe we can stick with 5 because 10, who knows?
Predictions are always a dangerous space to play because if I remember correctly, it's been the year of mobile for the last 5 years. But the digital ecosystem has grown exponentially, and in doing so has fragmentation. So we've got more audiences, more content, more platforms to choose from, but with less time available to each of us. And I feel that's given rise to the industry's need to grab customer attention. And I was actually sitting on a call earlier with Karen Nelson Fields around sort of the attention economy, and it was absolutely fascinating. And because of the shift with less time and a greater volume of stuff, it's become harder to grab attention. So we've seen communication become shorter, become punchier. Doesn't mean it's become better. And I think to some marketers' detriment at a higher frequency. So we're giving consumers shorter but more often. And it doesn't always work that way. And understanding the knock-on effect of decreasing consumer attention and the depreciation of third-party cookies, I think the biggest, and I wouldn't say trend, because, for me, a trend is a flash in the pan. It happens and then it's gone. And for me, what we're going to see is we're going to see a fundamental shift. And I suspect that the role digital marketing plays within a brand's ecosystem is what is going to shift because of this multitude of factors coming into play.
When you mean you spoke about the digital marketing shifting, what exactly do you mean by that?
So for example, digital marketing, it can be many things to many different brands, but if we were talking awareness, we would automatically go to, okay, well, we often call Facebook the TV, the digital TV, because it can give us mass awareness. And we would say that programmatic display and video would be the same. But with the depreciation of third-party cookies, our tact is going to have to change quite drastically. So you might find that digital no longer becomes a mass awareness channel. The way that we approach it and the I suppose the merit we give it within the overarching plan is going to change. And that for me it's going to be different. I think we'll see certain things in certain verticals. What digital has always done quite well is that it works incredibly well with other mediums. So, we've been able to pair traditional above the line channels using digital to capture the conversation or to capture engagement and continue a conversation.
With all the change in digital, where do you think, like, on average, people, and I'll actually go, companies are getting it wrong with digital?
Measurement is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite words, and measurement means so many different things, and that's why it's so important, because it's indicative of having not linked objectives to channels. And you and I have had a couple of conversations, and I think even just listening to some of my feedback now, I talk a lot about the role and why role of channel, role of platform is so important. And for me, it's the deliberate decision that you take. And because you've been deliberate, you understand how you're going to measure it. You're not just doing digital for the sake of it. You're doing digital because. What is that because? And if you don't know the role it's playing, you can't identify the objective. And if you can't identify the objective, how do you measure it? How do you know if you've been successful? So if you don't know what you're trying to achieve at the onset, you're never going to measure it successfully. And it's, a great example is somebody buying media on a cost per thousand basis when actually what they're going to be measuring is leads. No, yes. Those two don't go hand in hand. And often measurement is the last thing that we do. We plan our media client will say how things are working, and then all of a sudden what we'll do is we'll be, oh, okay, cool, we're getting this amount of impressions, but because you never had that conversation up front in terms of what does success look like for you, and how do I translate that into successful media metrics, and actually that measurement conversation and what we're trying to achieve through whatever tactics we're employing should be at the heart of everything that we do, and not as a nice to have at the end of it.
So what would you say the biggest challenge you believe in digital marketing as a whole is at the moment?
Talent and skill sets. I think that we've seen an increase in new entrants in terms of the workforce into the industry, but I don't believe the quality of the entrants is where we need it to be. I think it's inconsistent, and it's inconsistent because we don't appear to have a definitive way of training people when it comes to digital marketing. And it's because we all approach it quite differently. There's schools of thought, like the conversation that we've just had about starting with the why. Then there's other schools of thought that you still buy Facebook on engagements. And until we even the playing field in terms of the basics and what we expect people to know when they enter a certain job, I think that this is going to continue to be a problem. And it also happens to be the reason that I'm so supportive of DMAT and, the work that you're doing, because I believe that we've got the opportunity together to, number one, identify the gap and skill sets in talent coming into the industry, but not only identify the gap, but actually to build out meaningful programs, distinct, individualized programs that help us bridge that gap. And that is something that we need, and we've needed for some time, and it's something that we've really never been able to address.
Yeah, I think the talent shortage is real at the moment, and I think people have a lot more potential and than what's being put out, and those gaps can be filled. And like you said, there's so many expertise within the digital space, but there is like a set of basics and even above basics that you do need everyone to know. And I was actually writing about it earlier, and it's almost like should be your digital compliance. It's like, look, if you're in digital marketing, this is your compliance stuff that you just should know. You need to know this to actually start understanding the broad picture, and then start honing down. You can then hone down on what the most important things are, but it allows you to kind of pull everything together and make sure that you got a full picture of things. If there's one piece of practical advice that you'd give to someone entering the beginning of their career.
Does it have to just be one?
You can give more than one. I accept more than one. Practical.
I would suggest that assume you don't know a thing. We get a lot of people coming into the industry thinking that they want to be a strategist or they want to be a something. And it's important to assume you know nothing, approach it with a blank page, and be willing to start at the very beginning. And it's important that you do not think that the beginning is the bottom, but rather the beginning of the journey of self-discovery. Because to your point, there are many specializations, but we cannot all be all things to everybody. And we need to find our niche, but you have to be open to exploring everything that the industry has to offer and understand that it could be very different to what you believed. And if I had to sum that up in one sentence, I would say be curious and get comfortable with being uncomfortable.